the critical thing she has to achieve is to get the UK in the deal zone with the US. The 10% tariff and the 25% coal tariff and the 25% steel tariff, these are significant hits to the UK economy, and it's critically important that we get a deal with the US and we remove that damage to the UK economy.
Well, she has now met with Mr. Bessent. We're waiting to hear some communique or a sense of what was discussed. What do you realistically expect to have come out of today's meeting?
Well, I mean, I think the US, has essentially made an opening bid to all of the countries that it's put a tariff on, and that is to be found in the National Trade Estimate, which is the inventory of foreign country trade barriers. So I think what she has to do, and what UK negotiators have to do, is to show the US that they're willing to improve or change some of the barriers that are listed in that inventory of foreign country trade barriers. And most of those issues are not actually tariffs. They are regulatory barriers, and particularly regulatory barriers in the sanitary and phytosanitary area, which is the area of regulation that covers animal and plant health. She'll also have to show that they're willing to move on things like the digital services tax and some of the other sort of major US asks. If I were the UK, I would also have some asks of my own with regard to my own offensive interests, and there are distortions in the US market as well that she could well raise. And I think if that's the type of conversation that they're starting to have, then I can see that a deal is possible. But we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves here.
Shanker, I see that in contrast with what Rachel Reeves is saying, the Tories' Shadow Trade Minister Andrew Griffiths has said that they, as in the Tories, would be prioritising trading relationships with the US, as we've already got a free trade agreement with the EU on goods. Who's right, do you think?
So, I mean, I think it's the wrong way to look at the problem, to say, which is more important relationship and therefore which is the one we're going to prioritise. The fact is the US, we have no trade deal with the US at all. We have a 10% tariff we're facing and 25% tariffs in cars and in steel. So it's imperative that we improve that situation. We do have a trade deal with the EU. Does it need to be improved? Yes, and it could be improved in a number of different ways. And I think the UK has a lot of flexibility in improving the EU trade deal and indeed improving the relationship with the EU, as long as it avoids one thing and one thing only, and that is taking away its regulatory authority. So I think if you're talking about a youth mobility scheme, if you're talking about Horizon, if you're talking about Erasmus, defence agreements, all of these things are things we can do that don't take away our regulatory authority. The one thing I think you can't do is a dynamic alignment agreement on SPS under the Court of Justice, because that takes away your authority to act. And first of all, it would make it almost impossible to do a deal with anybody, let alone the US. But even if by some magical, piece of negotiating sleight of hand, they're able to do a deal with the US and they do dynamic alignment with the EU, that puts the UK in an incredibly dangerous position, because if the EU then changes its regulation, although the US will say, as they do in their National Trade Estimate, that the EU is in current violation of the rules, of the WTO rules. So the US could sue the UK under that agreement. They could then impose a much bigger tariff on the UK, and then the UK would have to respond. The only way they could respond, because they have no authority over their regulatory regime, is to drop that agreement that they just agreed with the EU, which would no doubt cause litigation. You'd then be between a rock and a hard place, and it would be fundamentally dangerous of the UK government to put the UK economy in that kind of situation, and it's not necessary.
It all sounds fiendishly complicated, Shanker. And into that maelstrom, let me throw some figures at you. The ONS has revealed that UK-US trade rose by 3.9% in 2024, compared to a paltry 0.2% growth in transactions with our EU partners. However, as you'll know, the EU remains a much bigger trading partner for us overall. I mean, £823 billion worth of transactions in the last year, compared to America's $315 billion. So the big question is, where is the greater prize? Where is the greater potential for growth? What can we sell more of to the US compared to what we can sell more of into the EU?
Yeah, so it's not an either or question. I mean, I think you want to maximise your revenues from all your markets, not just EU and US, but also our recently acceded our recent negotiation with the CPTPP countries, with Asia, with the fast-growing economies of the Middle East and India and so forth, and we're doing trade deals with them as well. The slow growth in trade with the EU is something that was happening even before we left the EU. And our trade with the US and with other countries was increasing. So clearly the potential for trade growth is greater with the faster growing economies of the world. So if you want to prioritize your long-term goals, you certainly want to be looking at the fast growing markets of the world, and the EU is not one of those.
And that was Shanker Singham.